I'm Jasmine Chen, 28 years old, and 3 months ago my sister Emily told me I was wasting my life in the military and would never amount to anything. The pain of her words still stings when I remember them. Last week, I watched her face turn white with shock when her CEO stood up at their company gala, snapped to attention, and said, "It's an honor to have Colonel Chen join us tonight." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I never planned on a military career. Growing up in our small town in Oregon, I was always the unreliable sister, at least according to my family. Emily was the golden child, valedictorian, perfect SAT scores, and accepted to Princeton with a partial scholarship. Meanwhile, I struggled through high school with undiagnosed ADHD, barely maintaining a C average while being constantly compared to my perfect older sister. "Why can't you be more like Emily?" became the soundtrack of my teenage years. My parents weren't cruel, just disappointed and confused by my seeming lack of drive. They were both successful professionals. Dad a hospital administrator and Mom a corporate attorney. Academic excellence wasn't just encouraged in our home, it was expected. The summer after my high school graduation, while Emily was interning at a prestigious consulting firm, I was still figuring out what to do with my life. College acceptance letters weren't exactly flooding our mailbox, and the few that did arrive were from community colleges my parents considered beneath our family's standards. "You need direction, Jasmine," my father said during one particularly tense dinner. "You can't just drift through life without a plan." I nodded, pushing peas around my plate while avoiding eye contact. The weight of their disappointment was suffocating. 2 days later, on a whim that would change my life, I walked into a military recruitment office. I wasn't looking for a career, just an escape. The recruiter, Staff Sergeant Martinez, saw something in me that my own family had missed. Instead of immediately signing me up, she invited me to coffee. "Why the military?" she asked bluntly after we'd settled at a corner table. "I need to get away," I admitted. "I need to prove I can do something worthwhile." She studied me for a long moment. "The military isn't an escape, Jasmine. It's a commitment. But I think you might have what we're looking for. You just don't know it yet." For the next hour, she asked me questions no one had ever bothered to ask before. Not about grades or achievements, but about how I think, how I solve problems, how I handle stress. By the end of our conversation, she recommended I take the ASVAB test, the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. To everyone's surprise, especially mine, I scored in the 92nd percentile. The test revealed aptitudes that had never been measured in school: spatial reasoning, mechanical comprehension, and problem-solving skills that traditional education had never tapped into. When I showed my results to my family, their reactions were mixed. My father was cautiously supportive, seeing the military as at least a structured path. My mother was concerned about danger. Emily was dismissive. "Anyone can do well on a test designed for people who couldn't get into college," she said with a shrug. "It's fine if you need this as a fallback, I guess." Her words stung, but I was used to being underestimated by then. 6 weeks later, I left for basic training, carrying little more than determination to prove that I was more than my family's lowest expectations. Basic training was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Physically, mentally, and emotionally demanding in ways I couldn't have imagined. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't the disappointment. My ability to think quickly under pressure, to solve problems creatively, to push through exhaustion, all the things that had never mattered in a classroom, suddenly mattered immensely. During a particularly grueling obstacle course, when half my platoon was ready to give up, I somehow found the words to rally them. "We don't have to be the fastest," I shouted as we struggled through mud. "We just have to keep moving forward together." We finished last, but we finished together, and our drill sergeant nodded with something that almost looked like approval. That night, he pulled me aside. "Chen, you have natural leadership qualities," he said. "Have you considered officer candidate school?" I hadn't. In fact, I'd never considered myself leadership material at all. Leaders were people like Emily, confident, articulate, always knowing the right answer. I was just trying to survive basic training. But his words planted a seed. Maybe I did have potential I hadn't recognized. Maybe the problem wasn't that I lacked ability, but that I'd been looking for it in all the wrong places. When I graduated from basic training, my parents attended the ceremony. Their awkward pride was evident as they pinned on my insignia, still not quite understanding the path I'd chosen, but trying to support me. Emily couldn't make it. She had an important internship interview that day. Over the next 2 years, I discovered abilities I never knew I possessed. I excelled in specialized training, finding that my brain, which had struggled with sitting still in classrooms, thrived in the military's mix of hands-on learning and practical application. My ADHD, once a liability, became an asset as I could hyper-focus during critical situations and think creatively when standard approaches failed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I applied to officer candidate school and was accepted, shocking myself more than anyone. The training was even more intense than basic had been, but I thrived under the pressure. For the first time in my life, I was at the top of my class. When I received my commission as a second lieutenant, my parents flew in for the ceremony. They seemed genuinely proud, if still somewhat confused by my success in this world so different from their own. Emily sent a text, "Congrats on the promotion thing. Sorry can't be there, presenting at a conference." The next 5 years were a blur of challenges and growth. I specialized in logistics and emergency response planning, discovering an aptitude for complex systems and crisis management. I deployed twice, leading teams in humanitarian aid missions that tested everything I'd learned. Each challenge I faced and overcame built confidence I'd never had before. My rapid promotion surprised everyone, including me. From second lieutenant to first lieutenant to captain, I climbed the ranks faster than average, earning commendations for innovative solutions to logistical problems that had stumped others. While I was building my career, Emily was building hers as well. She'd landed a job at Vertex Innovations, one of the fastest-growing tech companies on the West Coast. She quickly rose to Director of Strategic Development, her natural intelligence and academic credentials opening doors at every turn. Our paths were different but parallel, both successful in our own spheres. The difference was that I recognized her achievements, while she still viewed mine as somehow less significant, a fallback career rather than a chosen path. During one of my rare visits home 4 years into my service, Emily and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen after a family dinner. She was telling me about her recent promotion and the corner office that came with it. "That's amazing, Em. You've always been so driven," I said, genuinely happy for her success. "Thanks," she replied, then hesitated before adding, "You know, if you ever want to transition to the corporate world, I could probably help you get your foot in the door. The military experience might translate to security consulting or something." "I'm actually really happy where I am," I told her. "I just got selected for the Advanced Tactical Operations program." She looked at me blankly. "That's good. I mean, I know playing soldier has been fun, but eventually you'll need a real career path, Joss. You can't just run around in combat boots forever." Her words hit me like a physical blow. After everything I'd accomplished, she still saw me as the directionless younger sister who needed her guidance. She still couldn't see that I had found my purpose, my strength, my calling. "It's not playing soldier, Emily. I lead teams that coordinate disaster relief and save lives," I said quietly, fighting to keep my voice steady. She sighed, patting my hand in a way that felt condescending. "I know you're doing important work. I just worry about your future. The military is fine for now, but it's not like you're going to become a general or something." I didn't argue. There seemed no point in defending my choices to someone who had already decided the ceiling of my potential. Shortly after that conversation, I was selected for an elite specialized training program that would ultimately change the trajectory of my career. Only 2% of applicants were accepted, and the program was known as a testing ground for future high-ranking officers. It required relocating across the country and committing to the most intensive professional challenge I'd yet faced. When I called my parents to tell them the news, they were supportive, if somewhat puzzled by my excitement over something they didn't fully understand. I didn't bother calling Emily. Instead, I texted her the update, receiving a thumbs-up emoji in response. The program pushed me beyond what I thought were my limits. 18-hour days, complex strategic simulations, leadership challenges designed to break even the most resilient candidates. I faced them all and somehow kept going. My ADHD brain, Once my greatest perceived weakness became my superpower, allowing me to see patterns and solutions others missed. 3 months into the program, our team was faced with a crisis simulation that had never been successfully resolved in the program's history. As others argued about conventional approaches, I mapped out an unconventional strategy that leveraged our limited resources in ways no one had considered. "This will never work," one of my colleagues said. "We've got nothing to lose by trying," I replied, surprising myself with my confidence. Not only did it work, but our team set a new benchmark for future classes. The program commander, Colonel Winters, called me into his office afterward. "Lieutenant Chen, that was some of the most innovative thinking I've seen in my 25 years running this program," he said, his typically stern expression softened with what might have been respect. "Where did you learn to approach problems that way?" I thought about it for a moment, realizing the truth as I spoke it. "I've spent my whole life having to find different ways to understand things, sir. My brain doesn't work like most people's. That used to feel like a failure, but here, it's finally an advantage." He nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes our greatest strengths come from what we once thought were weaknesses. Keep trusting that unique perspective, Lieutenant. It's going to take you far." His words stayed with me, a powerful affirmation that the qualities my family had seen as flaws could actually be gifts in the right context. As the program progressed, I found myself taking on leadership roles naturally, no longer the hesitant, self-doubting person I'd once been. When we graduated, I had earned not only top marks but the respect of peers who had initially dismissed me. My next assignment brought an unexpected promotion to major, placing me in charge of developing new emergency response protocols for military operations in disaster zones. The work was challenging and deeply meaningful, allowing me to create systems that would ultimately save lives. Throughout these years, communication with my family remained sporadic. My parents had gradually come to accept my career choice, even developing a certain pride in my accomplishments, though they still didn't fully understand them. Emily and I exchanged occasional texts and saw each other at holidays, our relationship cordial but distant. During one particularly successful deployment where my team coordinated the evacuation of a coastal town before a devastating hurricane, I received a rare call from Emily. "Just checking in," she said. "Mom mentioned you were involved in that hurricane response they're talking about on the news." "Yeah, my team has been coordinating with local authorities on evacuation and supply distribution," I replied, exhausted but proud of what we'd accomplished. "Sounds intense," she said. "Listen, I'm calling because Vertex is hosting this big charity gala next month for disaster relief, and we're honoring first responders and military personnel involved in recent operations. I thought, well, if you're back by then, maybe you'd want to come? It would look good for the company to have actual military representation." The invitation surprised me, though her framing of it as something that would benefit her company rather than a desire to recognize my work did not. "When is it?" I asked, checking my mental calendar. "October 15th. It's black tie, very high profile. The CEO and board members will all be there, along with major donors and press." "I should be back by then," I said. "Send me the details." What I didn't tell her, what I couldn't tell her yet, was that I had recently received news that would forever change how she saw me. After years of dedicated service, innovative leadership, and a series of increasingly challenging assignments successfully completed, I had been selected for early promotion to lieutenant colonel, an achievement that placed me in the top percentage of officers my age. The promotion would become official just days before her gala, but the news was under wraps until the formal announcement. For once, I would let my accomplishments speak for themselves rather than trying to convince my sister of my worth. In the weeks leading up to the gala, I wrapped up my deployment and returned stateside for the promotion ceremony. Standing tall as the colonel pinned my new rank insignia, I felt a sense of validation that went beyond the professional honor. This wasn't just about military advancement. It was tangible proof that I had found my path and excelled on it, despite everyone who had doubted me, including at times myself. My parents attended the ceremony, their faces showing genuine pride that had evolved from their earlier confusion about my choices. "We never imagined this," my mother whispered as she hugged me afterward. "But we should have. You always had something special in you, Jasmine." Emily didn't attend. She was too busy with final preparations for the gala. She didn't know about the promotion, and I decided to keep it that way. For once, I wanted to see her genuine reaction, not a prepared response. The night of the gala arrived. I wore my dress uniform, the new silver oak leaves of a lieutenant colonel gleaming on my shoulders. The event was being held at the Grand Plaza Hotel, its ballroom transformed into an elegant venue with crystal chandeliers and tables adorned with elaborate floral arrangements. I checked in at the reception desk, where a young woman in a black cocktail dress consulted her tablet. "Name, please?" "Lieutenant Colonel Jasmine Chen," I said, still not quite used to the sound of my new rank. She glanced up, her eyes widening slightly as she took in my uniform and rank insignia. "Of course, Colonel Chen. You're seated at table 1 with the CEO and executive board. Ms. Emily Chen specifically requested your placement." I nodded my thanks, somewhat surprised by the prominent seating. Perhaps Emily was more proud of me than she let on. The ballroom was already filled with people in evening wear. The low hum of conversation punctuated by occasional laughter and the soft notes of a string quartet in the corner. I scanned the room, eventually spotting Emily near the stage, deep in conversation with an older man in an expensive suit, likely her CEO. She hadn't seen me yet, so I made my way across the room, stopping occasionally as people noticed my uniform and thanked me for my service. It was always a somewhat awkward interaction. I never quite knew how to respond, but I appreciated the sentiment behind it. I was about 10 feet away when Emily finally turned and saw me. Her eyes widened, first with recognition and then with visible confusion as she registered the rank insignia on my uniform. I watched as she quickly composed herself, professional smile back in place as she approached. "Jasmine, you made it," she said, air kissing my cheek. "I didn't realize you'd be in uniform." "It seemed appropriate for the occasion," I replied. She nodded, eyes still flickering to my shoulders. "Right, of course. Come meet Mr. Davidson, our CEO. He's very interested in our military partnerships." She led me to the distinguished-looking man she'd been speaking with. "Mr. Davidson, this is my sister," I mentioned, Jasmine. "She's with the military." The CEO extended his hand, but as his eyes fell on my rank insignia, something changed in his expression. He straightened almost imperceptibly, his casual demeanor shifting to one of respect. "Lieutenant Colonel Chen," he said, his handshake firm. "I wasn't aware that Emily's sister held such a distinguished rank. What's your area of specialization?" Before I could answer, Emily interjected, her voice slightly higher than normal. "Jasmine just got promoted recently. She works in— what is it again, Jas? Supply chain management? Emergency response coordination and strategic logistics," I corrected gently. "And yes, the promotion came through last week." Mr. Davidson nodded appreciatively. "Impressive achievement at your age, Colonel. We actually have several veterans on our board who speak very highly of the logistics innovations coming out of your division. The hurricane response protocols were particularly groundbreaking." Emily's expression flickered between surprise and confusion, clearly unprepared for her CEO to be familiar with my work. "You know about Jasmine's projects?" "Of course," Davidson replied. "Vertex has been looking at adapting some military logistics models for our global supply chain. The efficiency gains could be substantial." He turned back to me. "We'd love to have your insights on the subject while you're here, Colonel." "I'd be happy to discuss it," I said, maintaining my composure despite the satisfaction I felt seeing Emily's perception of me being rewritten in real time. As more guests arrived, we were directed to our tables for dinner. I found myself seated between Mr. Davidson and another executive, with Emily across from us. Throughout the meal, the conversation repeatedly turned to my work, with genuine interest from the business leaders in how military logistics strategies might apply to corporate operations. Emily remained uncharacteristically quiet, watching as her colleagues engaged with me as a peer, perhaps even as someone whose expertise they valued and respected. The sister she had dismissed as playing soldier was being treated as an authority by people she sought to impress. After dinner, Mr. Davidson rose to give his opening remarks for the evening. He welcomed everyone, explained the charitable purpose of the gala, and then did something unexpected. "Before we proceed with tonight's program, I'd like to acknowledge a distinguished guest joining us this evening," he said, his voice carrying across the hushed ballroom. "We're honored to have Lieutenant Colonel Jasmine Chen with us." To my surprise, he stepped away from the podium and walked to where I was seated. Then, in a gesture that sent a ripple of whispers through the room, he stood at attention and offered a crisp, respectful salute. Colonel Chen's innovative work in crisis response has saved countless lives, including during the recent hurricane that devastated our coast. He continued after returning to the podium. Her protocols have become the gold standard not just for military operations but for civilian emergency management as well. We at Vertex are exploring partnerships to implement similar systems in our global humanitarian efforts. A warm round of applause followed, and I acknowledged it with a nod, deeply moved by the unexpected recognition. Across the table, Emily's face had gone through a remarkable transformation. Shock, disbelief, and finally, something that looked almost like dawning respect. Later, as people mingled during the dessert service, Emily found her way to my side, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. She offered one to me, her expression thoughtful. "Lieutenant Colonel," she said, the rank sounding strange in her voice, "you never mentioned the promotion." I accepted the glass. Would it have mattered if I had? She had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I deserved that, I suppose." She paused, swirling the champagne in her glass. "I've been unfair to you, haven't I? You saw my path as less valuable because it wasn't the one you would have chosen," I replied, not accusingly but stating what we both knew to be true. "I think I saw it as less valuable because I didn't understand it," she admitted. "When Mr. Davidson talks about your work, it's with the same respect he uses for our top engineers and researchers. I never realized that I found my purpose? That I'm good at what I do?" She nodded, looking genuinely contrite. "I'm sorry, Joss. I've been so caught up in my definition of success that I couldn't see yours, even when it was right in front of me." The apology surprised me. Emily had never been one to admit being wrong. Perhaps this was growth for both of us. "Do you remember what you said to me the last time we really talked about my career?" I asked. "About how I was just playing soldier and would eventually need a real career path?" She winced. "I was wrong. Obviously very wrong." "You know what hurt the most about that?" I continued. "Not that you underestimated what I could achieve in the military, but that you thought I was still the directionless teenager who needed your guidance to find her way. You never saw how much I'd grown." "I see it now," she said quietly. "I'm seeing a lot of things more clearly tonight." As the evening continued, I was approached by several of Emily's colleagues, all interested in my work and experiences. One board member was a former Navy officer who knew my commanding officer. Another was involved in international disaster relief and had seen my team's protocols in action. With each conversation, I watched Emily's perception of me visibly shift. Near the end of the evening, as the event wound down, Emily and I found ourselves alone on the hotel's terrace. The city lights spread out below us. "You know what's ironic?" she said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between us. "All those years, I thought you needed to be more focused, more driven, more like me. But you were just focused on different things, driven in your own way." I nodded, appreciating her self-awareness. "We were always different, Em. That's not a bad thing." "No, it's not," she agreed. "But I should have supported your different instead of trying to make it more like mine." She turned to face me fully. "I'm proud of you, Jasmine. Really proud. And I'm sorry it took seeing other people recognize your value for me to fully see it too." Her words, the validation I had unconsciously sought for so long, washed over me, and yet I realized something important. I no longer needed them the way I once had. Somewhere along my journey, I had stopped measuring my worth through my family's eyes and learned to see it through my own. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot." "So, Lieutenant Colonel," she said, a hint of her old teasing tone returning, but without the dismissiveness that had once accompanied it. "What's next for you? Is general in the cards?" I laughed. "One step at a time. But yes, it's possible." She shook her head, smiling with what looked like genuine amazement. "My little sister, a general. Who would have thought?" "I would have," I said quietly, "if anyone had asked me what I wanted instead of telling me what I couldn't do." The truth of those words hung between us. Not an accusation, but a gentle reminder that sometimes the greatest gift we can give those we love is the space to define success on their own terms. As we prepared to leave the gala, Emily surprised me once more. "Mom and Dad don't know about your promotion yet, do they?" I shook my head. "They came to the ceremony, but I asked them to let me tell you in my own way." "Well," she said, "I think this calls for a family dinner. A proper celebration. And this time I promise to listen more than I talk." 3 days later, seated around our parents' dining table with a cake decorated with silver oak leaves, I shared stories of my journey, the challenges, the triumphs, the moments of doubt and breakthrough. For the first time, my family truly listened, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than puzzled tolerance. The path to that moment hadn't been easy. It had required me to reject others' limited vision of my potential and forge my own way. It had meant finding strength in qualities I once saw as weaknesses and purpose in a direction no one had expected me to take. But as I looked around at my family, at my sister, who now introduced me as my sister, the Lieutenant Colonel, with unmistakable pride, I realized that sometimes the people who love us most can be the slowest to see who we've become. Not because they don't care, but because they're still seeing who we were when their perceptions of us were formed. The journey hadn't just changed how my family saw me, it had transformed how I saw myself. The uncertain teenager who once believed her sister's assessment of her limitations had become a woman who knew her worth, who had found her calling, and who had learned perhaps the most important lesson of all, that the only person who can truly define your potential is you. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever had your dreams dismissed by those who should have supported them, know this: other people's perception of your ceiling isn't your actual ceiling. Their inability to see your potential doesn't diminish it. The path that's right for you might be the one no one else understands, until one day, they do. And when that day comes, when the boss stands up and salutes the colonel, when the doubters finally see what you've known all along, the victory isn't in proving them wrong. It's in realizing you no longer need their validation to know your worth. I never thought I'd end up in the military, that's for sure. Growing up in Cedar Falls, Oregon, population just under 9,008, I had always been the family disappointment. Our parents had 2 daughters, but only one who seemed to meet their expectations. Emily was 4 years older than me and excelled at everything without even trying. She got straight A's, was class president 3 years running, and could charm any adult within minutes of meeting them. I, on the other hand, was the kid who couldn't sit still, who asked too many questions, and who regularly tested teachers' patience. "Jasmine just needs to apply herself," teachers would tell my parents at conferences, while I slouched in the hard plastic chair beside them. "She's clearly intelligent, but she's not living up to her potential." My parents tried everything: tutors, study schedules, rewards for good grades, and punishments for bad ones. Nothing worked. My mind simply refused to engage with traditional education. I'd start a homework assignment only to find myself 3 hours later having researched the history of pencils instead of completing my algebra problems. It wasn't until I was 22 that a military doctor finally put a name to what I'd experienced my whole life: ADHD. By then, I'd spent years believing I was just lazy, unmotivated, or not as smart as my sister. That diagnosis was the first step in understanding that my brain wasn't broken. It just worked differently. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to where this story really begins. The summer after high school graduation was tense in our household. Emily had just completed her junior year at Princeton, where she was double majoring in economics and international relations. She had landed a prestigious summer internship at a consulting firm and was already fielding job offers for after graduation. Meanwhile, I had barely scraped through high school with a 2.3 GPA and had been rejected from every 4-year college I'd applied to. "Community college isn't the end of the world," my father said one night at dinner, his tone suggesting he thought it might actually be. "You can transfer to a university after 2 years if you get your grades up." My mother nodded encouragingly. "Lots of successful people started at community college. It's practical. The word practical hung in the air like a consolation prize. In our family, practical was what you settled for when you couldn't achieve exceptional. Emily looked up from her plate. You know, Jas, if you'd just put in half the effort I did in high school, you wouldn't be in this position. Emily, my mother cautioned, but without much conviction. What? It's true. I watched her play video games for hours instead of studying. She never joined any extracurriculars. She didn't even try. The unfairness of her assessment stung. I had tried, desperately. I'd spent countless nights staring at textbooks that might as well have been written in hieroglyphics for all the sense they made to me. I'd signed up for clubs only to drop them when I couldn't keep track of meeting times or follow through on commitments. My failures weren't from lack of effort. They were from not knowing how to channel my efforts effectively. But I didn't have the words to explain this then. Instead, I pushed back my chair and left the table, ignoring my mother's calls to come back. I spent that evening driving aimlessly around our small town, eventually parking at the high school football field, where I'd spent many Friday nights not as a cheerleader like Emily had been, but sitting alone in the bleachers, watching other people live what seemed like fuller, more successful lives. As I sat in my car that night, I realized I needed to get away from Cedar Falls, away from being Emily Chen's disappointing little sister. I needed to find something, anything, that could give me purpose and direction. The next morning, I drove to the neighboring town where there was a small military recruitment center sandwiched between a pizza place and a thrift store. I had no plan, really. The military had never been on my radar as a career option. No one in our family had served. But something about the structure, the clarity of purpose, appealed to me. When I walked in, a woman in uniform looked up from her desk. Staff Sergeant Martinez, according to her nameplate, had warm brown eyes and a no-nonsense expression. "Can I help you?" she asked. I'm interested in joining the military," I said, the words sounding strange even to my own ears. She nodded, not looking particularly impressed or surprised. "Had a seat. Let's talk about why." That question caught me off guard. I'd expected a sales pitch, not an interrogation of my motives. "Why does it matter why I want to join?" I asked. "Because the military isn't a fallback plan or a last resort," she said bluntly. "It's a commitment that will demand everything you have and then ask for more. I need to know if you're joining for the right reasons." I appreciated her honesty. "I don't know if my reasons are right," I admitted. "I need to get away from my hometown. I need to do something meaningful. I need to find out if I'm capable of more than what everyone thinks." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "That's more honest than most of the answers I get. Tell me about yourself." For the next hour, I told her things I'd never articulated to anyone, how I felt like my brain was wired differently, how traditional education had never worked for me, how I craved structure but rebelled against arbitrary rules, how I could focus intensely on things that interested me but couldn't force my attention to subjects that didn't engage me. Instead of dismissing these traits as problems, she listened thoughtfully. "You know," she said finally, "some of what you're describing might actually be advantages in certain military roles. The ability to hyper-focus under pressure, to think outside established parameters, to question protocols when they don't make sense. These can be valuable traits if properly channeled." It was the first time anyone had suggested that the very qualities that had made me struggle in school might be strengths in the right context. The idea was revolutionary to me. "I think you should take the ASVAB," she said, referring to the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. It measures different kinds of aptitudes, not just academic ones. You might be surprised by the results. I took the test the following week, with no preparation and low expectations. When the results came back, Staff Sergeant Martinez called me personally. "You scored in the 92nd percentile," she said. "Particularly high in mechanical comprehension, spatial relations, and problem solving. These scores qualify you for pretty much any specialty you might be interested in." I was stunned. After years of academic underperformance, the idea that I had scored in the top 10% of anything seemed impossible. "Are you sure there wasn't a mistake?" I asked. She laughed. "No mistake. Like I said, different kinds of intelligence. The question now is, what do you want to do with it?" That night, I brought my test results home. My parents examined the paper with obvious confusion, as if trying to reconcile this evidence of ability with their long-held perceptions of me. "This is unexpected," my father said finally. My mother seemed more supportive. "This is wonderful, Jasmine. It shows you have real potential." Emily, home for the weekend from her internship, was less impressed. "The military designs these tests to make people feel good so they'll enlist," she said dismissively. "It's not like it's an IQ test or the LSAT." Her words were like a bucket of cold water, dampening what little pride I'd felt in my achievement. But something had changed in me. For the first time, I had objective evidence that I might be good at something. Not just adequate, but actually good. "I'm enlisting," I announced. "I've already started the paperwork." My parents exchanged worried glances. "Are you sure that's the best path?" my father asked. "Maybe you should take a year, work a little, think about what you really want." "I have thought about it," I insisted. "This feels right." Emily rolled her eyes. "It feels right because it's an escape hatch. You're running away from having to compete in the real world." Her words hit close to home, but not in the way she intended. Yes, I was escaping a world where I had been measured by standards that didn't capture my abilities, escaping a family dynamic where I was perpetually in the shadow of a sister who couldn't see my struggles as anything but choices. "Maybe I am running away," I said quietly, "but at least I'll be running towards something too." 6 weeks later, I left for basic training. My parents drove me to the bus station, their faces a mixture of worry and resignation. Emily was already back at Princeton and had sent a brief text, "Good luck with boot camp. Try not to quit." It was as close to encouragement as she could manage. Basic training was a shock to the system, intentionally so. The physical demands were intense but not impossible. What surprised me was how well I adapted to the structure. For someone who had always struggled with organization and time management, there was something freeing about having every minute of my day planned, every expectation clearly defined. Don't get me wrong, it was brutal. The drill sergeant seemed to find fault with everything I did, but unlike the criticism I'd received throughout my education, their feedback was immediate, specific, and actionable. They weren't judging me against some invisible standard or comparing me to other recruits. They were pushing me to meet clear, defined objectives. For the first time in my life, I knew exactly what was expected of me, and that clarity was transformative. 3 weeks into training, we faced a night navigation exercise. Divided into teams of 4, we were dropped in different locations and had to find our way to a rendezvous point using only a map, compass, and the stars. My team included a former Boy Scout who immediately took charge, a college athlete who was physically strong but directionally challenged, and a quiet recruit who seemed perpetually terrified. The scout insisted on following a straight path to our destination, but I noticed something on the map he'd missed, a creek that would be difficult to cross at night. I suggested an alternative route that would take us to a narrower crossing point. "That's a major detour," he argued. "We'll lose time. We'll lose more time if we get stuck at the crossing, or if someone gets hurt," I countered. He ignored my suggestion, and we set off on his route. Sure enough, when we reached the creek, it was swollen from recent rains, too wide and fast to cross safely in the dark. "Now what?" the athlete demanded, frustrated. The scout looked lost, his confidence shaken. The quiet recruit was on the verge of panic. Something clicked in my brain then, a sense of clarity I'd rarely experienced before. I pulled out the map again and quickly calculated a new route. "We need to head northwest for about 800 meters, I said with surprising authority. "There's a fallen tree marked on the map that should provide a crossing. From there, it's a straight shot to the rendezvous point." The others looked at me skeptically, but with no better options, they followed. To everyone's surprise, including my own, my navigation was flawless. We found the crossing exactly where I'd predicted and reached the rendezvous point ahead of most other teams. Our drill sergeant, a stern woman who rarely offered praise, looked at me with newfound respect. "Chen," she said, "how did you know about that crossing?" "It wasn't mentioned in the briefing." "I noticed it on the map, drill sergeant," I replied. The contour lines suggested a narrower point, and the tree was marked as a landmark. She nodded thoughtfully. "Good spatial awareness. Good problem solving under pressure. Those are valuable skills." It was a small moment, but it shifted something fundamental in how I saw myself. My brain, which had always seemed like a liability in academic settings, had just proven to be an asset in a real-world challenge. As training continued, I discovered other strengths I hadn't known I possessed. My ability to hyper-focus during critical situations, my creative approach to problem-solving, my capacity to remain calm when others panicked. These traits began to define me in this new environment. By the time I graduated from basic training, I had been selected for specialized training in logistics and emergency response coordination, areas that leveraged my natural abilities to process complex spatial information and think creatively under pressure. My parents attended my graduation ceremony, looking somewhat shell-shocked to see me in uniform, standing tall and confident. My father awkwardly patted my shoulder, saying, "You look different, Jasmine, more grown up." My mother hugged me tightly. "We're proud of you," she whispered, and I believed she meant it. Emily couldn't attend. She was interviewing for post-graduation jobs, but she sent a text. "Congrats on completing basic. Hope the next phase goes well." It was restrained but not dismissive, which felt like progress. The specialized training that followed was even more challenging than basic, but it was also more engaging. For the first time in my life, I was learning things that genuinely interested me: logistics systems, emergency protocols, resource allocation during crises. My brain, which had always struggled to focus on abstract academic concepts, latched onto these practical applications with surprising tenacity. I excelled in ways I never had before. When instructors presented complex logistical problems, I could visualize multiple solutions almost immediately. When crisis simulations threw unexpected complications at us, I adapted quickly, while others struggled to adjust their thinking. During one particularly challenging exercise, we were tasked with coordinating the evacuation of a simulated coastal town before a hurricane. Resources were limited, time was short, and the scenario kept evolving with new complications. While my teammates focused on following standard protocols, I noticed a pattern in the town's layout that suggested an alternative approach. By rerouting evacuation paths and reassigning resources based on geographical features rather than administrative boundaries, we could potentially move people to safety much more efficiently. "That's not how it's done," one teammate objected when I proposed my solution. "Maybe it should be," I countered, surprising myself with my confidence. The standard protocol was designed for inland towns with grid layouts. This coastal community has different geographical constraints. Our instructor, Captain Rivera, overheard the discussion and approached our table. "Let's hear Chen's approach," he said. As I explained my reasoning using the map to illustrate the geographical features I'd noticed, a hush fell over the room. Other teams stopped their own discussions to listen. When I finished, Captain Rivera studied the map for a long moment, then looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "In my 15 years of running this exercise," he said finally, "no one has ever proposed this approach. It's unorthodox, but—" He traced the evacuation routes I'd suggested with his finger, "potentially much more effective than our standard protocols." He turned to address the entire class. "This, recruits, is why we need diverse thinking in emergency response." Chen didn't just apply what she was taught, she observed, analyzed, and adapted based on the specific situation at hand. That moment changed everything for me. It wasn't just that I had come up with a good solution. It was the realization that my different way of thinking, the very thing that had made traditional education so challenging, could be valuable, even vital, in the right context. Over the next 2 years, I continued to surprise both myself and my superiors with my aptitude for logistics and emergency response planning. I was promoted to specialist ahead of schedule and began to receive assignments that typically went to more experienced personnel. During this time, my relationship with my family slowly evolved. My parents, seeing my success and growing confidence, became more supportive, though they still didn't fully understand the nature of my work. Emily, immersed in her own career trajectory at a fast-growing tech firm called Vertex Innovations, maintained a polite but distant interest in my military career. When I was selected for officer candidate school, I called my parents immediately, excited to share the news. My father, who had initially seen my enlistment as a fallback option, now sounded genuinely proud. Officer candidate school? That's impressive, Jasmine. Very impressive. My mother was even more effusive. Oh, honey, that's wonderful. Will you get to choose where you're stationed after that? Emily's response, when I texted her the news, was predictably measured. Congrats on the promotion opportunity. Moving up the ranks quickly, it seems. Not exactly overflowing with sisterly pride, but it was something. Officer candidate school was the most intellectually and physically demanding experience of my life to that point. The coursework was rigorous, the leadership challenges intense, and the expectations sky-high. But I thrived in this environment in a way I never had in traditional academic settings. I discovered that I had a natural talent for strategic thinking and a gift for leading others through complex, high-pressure situations. My ability to visualize multiple possible outcomes of a decision, a trait that had once left me paralyzed with indecision in everyday life, became an asset in tactical planning. Midway through OCS, we participated in a leadership reaction course, a series of physical and mental challenges designed to test our ability to lead under pressure. One scenario involved getting a team across a simulated contaminated area using limited resources, a few planks, some rope, and a pulley system. Most candidates approached the problem methodically, applying techniques they'd learned in training. When my turn came, I immediately saw a solution that no one else had considered, one that used the terrain itself as part of the crossing mechanism. Chen, what are you doing? The evaluating officer asked as I began setting up the equipment in an unconventional configuration. Using the slope to our advantage, sir, I replied, continuing my work. If we anchor here and here, we can create a zipline effect that will reduce the physical strain on the team and cut our crossing time in half. He looked skeptical but nodded for me to proceed. My approach worked perfectly, and we completed the challenge in record time. Afterward, the officer pulled me aside. That was innovative thinking, candidate. Unorthodox, but effective. Where did you learn that technique? I didn't, sir, I admitted. I just looked at the problem differently. He studied me for a moment. You have a unique perspective, Chen. That's a valuable trait in an officer. Too many leaders get stuck in conventional thinking. By the time I graduated from OCS and received my commission as a second lieutenant, I had begun to understand something fundamental about myself. My brain wasn't broken or deficient. It was simply wired to see patterns and possibilities that others might miss. In the right environment, with the right challenges, this different wiring wasn't a disability, it was a superpower. My parents attended my commissioning ceremony, beaming with a pride that no longer seemed reluctant or confused. Emily sent flowers and a card that read, "Congratulations on finding your path, Emma." It wasn't effusive, but it felt sincere. As I pinned on my gold bars, I thought about how far I'd come from that uncertain teenager who had walked into a recruitment office looking for an escape. I had found not just a career, but a calling, a place where my unique way of seeing the world was valued rather than corrected. What I didn't know then was that the greatest tests of my abilities and of my relationship with my sister still lay ahead. The path from second lieutenant to lieutenant colonel would be filled with challenges I couldn't yet imagine, and would ultimately lead to a moment of reckoning that would change how Emily saw me forever. But standing there in my new officer's uniform, I already understood the most important lesson of my journey so far. Sometimes our greatest strengths grow from the very traits others have labeled as weaknesses. And sometimes finding your place in the world isn't about changing who you are. It's about finding the world that needs exactly who you've always been. My first assignment as a second lieutenant took me to Fort Carson, Colorado, where I joined the 4th Infantry Division's logistics team. The Rocky Mountains provided a dramatic backdrop to this new chapter of my life, their solid presence a daily reminder that I too could stand tall and unmovable in the face of challenges. Those first few months tested everything I had learned. As a new officer, I faced the classic dilemma: I had authority, but limited experience. Some of the enlisted personnel under my command had been in the military longer than I'd been an adult. They watched me with skeptical eyes, waiting to see if I would be the type of officer who hid behind rank or one who earned their respect. I chose the harder path, admitting when I didn't know something while working twice as hard to learn quickly. I asked questions, listened to their expertise, and showed them I valued their experience. Slowly, the skepticism in their eyes gave way to something else, a cautious acceptance that gradually evolved into respect. Captain Rodriguez, my commanding officer, became an unexpected mentor. A 20-year veteran with a reputation for being demanding but fair, she took a special interest in my development. "You think differently than most officers I've worked with, Lieutenant Chen," she told me one evening as we reviewed supply chain protocols. "At first I thought it might be a liability, but I'm starting to see it's actually your greatest strength." "Different hasn't always been seen as a strength in my experience," I admitted. She smiled knowingly. "The military values uniformity in many things: appearance, procedure, discipline. But in problem solving? In crisis response, we need minds that can see beyond the obvious, that can find the path others miss. Your brain works the way it does for a reason, Lieutenant. Don't try to think like everyone else. We already have plenty of those." Her words gave me permission to lean into my natural thought processes rather than struggling to conform to conventional approaches. It was liberating. 6 months into my assignment, we faced a major test when devastating wildfires broke out in the surrounding mountains. Our unit was activated to support civilian emergency responders with evacuation assistance and supply management. The situation was chaotic: multiple fires spreading rapidly, unpredictable wind changes, and thousands of civilians in remote areas needing evacuation. During a planning meeting with emergency management officials, I noticed something in their evacuation strategy that concerned me. They were prioritizing certain areas based solely on population density, without accounting for the fire's projected movement patterns or the limited access roads in some regions. As the most junior officer in the room, speaking up felt presumptuous. But lives were at stake. "Sir," I addressed the fire chief who was leading the meeting, "I'm concerned about the evacuation sequence for the Northwest Quadrant." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to me. I felt my heart rate spike but continued, using a topographical map to illustrate my point. Based on the wind patterns and the terrain, the fire will likely move faster through these canyons than predicted. And there's only one access road for these 3 communities. If we wait until they're in the standard evacuation sequence, that road could be compromised. The fire chief frowned, studying the map. "You're suggesting we evacuate out of the established priority order?" "Yes, sir. I believe we need to get these communities out first, before the main evacuation begins. Otherwise, we risk trapping several hundred people with no exit route." Captain Rodriguez gave me a barely perceptible nod of encouragement as the room erupted in debate. Some emergency officials insisted on following standard protocols, while others saw the merit in my concern. After intense discussion, the fire chief made his decision. "We'll adjust the evacuation sequence, as Lieutenant Chen suggests. Better to be cautious than sorry." That night, the fire behaved exactly as I had predicted, moving rapidly through the canyons and cutting off the main access road just hours after we'd evacuated those communities. Had we followed the standard protocol, hundreds of people might have been trapped. The next morning, the fire chief sought me out. "That was good instinct yesterday, Lieutenant. You saved a lot of lives. Where did you learn to read fire patterns like that?" "I don't have specific training in wildfire behavior, sir," I admitted. "I just noticed the relationship between the wind direction, the terrain, and the road access." He studied me for a moment. "Well, whatever you want to call it. Instinct, analysis, divine intervention. It was spot on. We need more thinkers like you in emergency management." Word of the incident spread, and I soon found myself with a reputation as someone who could see patterns others missed. What followed were assignments of increasing responsibility: coordinating joint training exercises with FEMA, developing new protocols for natural disaster response, and eventually being selected to lead a team tasked with reimagining military logistics for complex humanitarian crises. With each success, my confidence grew. The military had given me something I'd never found in traditional education, a place where my different way of thinking was valued rather than corrected. As my career advanced, my relationship with my family evolved in parallel. My parents, who had once viewed my enlistment as a fallback option, now spoke proudly of their daughter, the officer. They displayed my formal military portrait in their living room and eagerly shared news of my promotions with friends and relatives. Emily's attitude was slower to change. Her own career had taken off spectacularly. She had risen to Director of Strategic Development at Vertex Innovations by age 30, becoming the youngest person ever to hold a director-level position at the company. Her professional success reinforced her belief that her path, prestigious education followed by corporate achievement, was the optimal route to success. During one of my rare visits home, about 4 years into my service, Emily and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen after a family dinner. She was telling me about her recent promotion and the corner office that came with it. "The view of the bay is incredible," she said, showing me pictures on her phone. "I can see all the way to the Golden Gate on clear days." "That's amazing, Em," I said sincerely. "You've accomplished so much already." She nodded, accepting the compliment as her due. "So how much longer do you think you'll stay in the military?" she asked, her tone suggesting she assumed this was a temporary phase in my life. "I'm not planning to leave," I replied. "I'm on a career track. I just got promoted to captain, and I'm being considered for a specialized training program that could put me on an accelerated advancement path." She looked genuinely surprised. "Oh, I always thought this was something you were doing until you figured out your real career path." The dismissiveness in her voice stung. "This is my real career path, Emily. I'm good at what I do. Really good, actually." She must have heard the edge in my voice because her expression softened slightly. "I'm sure you are. I just meant. Well, the military isn't exactly where most people plan to spend their whole professional life, especially people from backgrounds like ours." "Maybe that's why it needs more people from backgrounds like ours," I countered. "Different perspectives, different approaches to problem solving." She nodded vaguely, clearly unconvinced. "Well, if you ever do decide to transition to the private sector, Vertex is always looking for people with leadership experience. I could put in a word, security management or something." The conversation moved on to other topics, but her words lingered. Even after years of successful service, multiple promotions, and recognition for my contributions, my sister still saw my military career as a placeholder, something I was doing until I found a real profession. It was frustrating but also motivating. I channeled that frustration into my work, pushing myself harder, taking on more challenging assignments, and continuing to approach problems in the unique way that had become my professional signature. 3 months later, I received news that would significantly accelerate my career trajectory. I had been selected for the Advanced Tactical Operations Program, an elite training opportunity offered to only a handful of officers each year. The program was known as a breeding ground for future high-ranking officers and would put me on a fast track for promotion beyond the typical timeline. When I called my parents to share the news, they were thrilled, even though they didn't fully understand the significance of the selection. "Does this mean you'll be moving again?" my mother asked, her primary concern being how far away I would be. "Yes, I'll be relocating to Fort Belvoir in Virginia for the training," I explained. "It's a big opportunity, Mom. Less than 2% of officers at my level get selected." "We're so proud of you, honey," she said warmly. "You've really found your place, haven't you?" Her words touched me deeply because they reflected an important truth. I had found my place. After years of feeling like a square peg in a round hole, I had discovered an environment where my unique attributes were strengths rather than weaknesses. I debated whether to share the news with Emily and finally decided to send her a text, keeping it brief and factual. "Just got selected for the Advanced Tactical Operations Program. It's a big honor, very competitive selection process. Moving to Virginia next month for the training." Her response came hours later. "Congrats. Good luck with the move. Thumbs up." The brevity and lack of curiosity stung, but I reminded myself that Emily had never shown much interest in understanding my military career. I pushed aside the disappointment and focused on preparing for the most challenging professional experience of my life so far. The Advanced Tactical Operations program lived up to its reputation. For 6 grueling months, I was pushed to my mental, physical, and emotional limits. We faced complex simulations that required split-second decision-making, developed strategic plans for scenarios that seemed impossible to resolve, and were evaluated on our ability to lead under extreme pressure. The program brought together officers from various branches and specialties, creating a diverse think tank of military talent. Among them was Major David Mercer, an intelligence officer whose analytical approach complemented my more intuitive problem-solving style. We were often paired for team exercises, our different strengths combining to produce solutions that impressed even the most seasoned instructors. "You see patterns that others miss," David told me once, after we'd successfully completed a particularly challenging simulation. "It's like you're looking at the same information as everyone else but seeing connections that aren't obvious to the rest of us." "It's just how my brain works," I explained. "It always has. Before the military, it was usually considered a problem rather than an asset." He shook his head. "Well, the military got lucky then. That kind of divergent thinking saves lives in our line of work." 3 months into the program, our class faced a crisis simulation that had never been successfully resolved in the program's history. The scenario involved coordinating an emergency evacuation of civilians from a conflict zone with rapidly deteriorating conditions, minimal resources, and complicated by a natural disaster that had damaged critical infrastructure. Previous classes had approached the problem conventionally, prioritizing high-density population centers, using standard evacuation protocols, and allocating resources based on established formulas. All had failed to evacuate the required percentage of civilians before conditions became unsurvivable. As our team studied the scenario, I began to see patterns in the geographical layout, the population distribution, and the projected movement of both military threats and the natural disaster that suggested an entirely different approach. "What if we don't think of this as a single evacuation operation?" I proposed, drawing curious looks from my teammates. "What if we treat it as a series of micro-evacuations, staged in a sequence that uses the terrain and infrastructure in unconventional ways?" I explained my vision, using the digital map to illustrate how we could create temporary safe corridors by strategically positioning our limited resources, then moving them in a carefully choreographed sequence that would allow us to evacuate smaller groups consecutively rather than attempting to move the entire population at once. "This violates pretty much every standard evacuation protocol," one teammate pointed out. "Standard protocols were designed for standard situations," I countered. "This scenario was specifically created to be unwinnable using conventional approaches." David backed me up. "Chen's approach is unorthodox, but the math works. If we coordinate the timing precisely, we could theoretically evacuate 94% of the population before conditions become critical." After intense debate, the team agreed to try my approach. We spent hours refining the plan, accounting for potential complications, and developing contingencies for when, not if, things went wrong. When simulation day arrived, the program directors and several high-ranking observers gathered to watch our attempt at the unwinnable scenario. The pressure was immense, but as we began implementing our strategy, a strange calm settled over me. This was what my brain was built for: seeing patterns, making unexpected connections, finding the path that others missed. The simulation was intense, with the directors throwing unexpected complications at us to test our adaptability. A bridge collapsed earlier than anticipated. A group of civilians refused to evacuate. Enemy forces appeared in an area we had deemed secure. With each new challenge, we adjusted our approach while maintaining the core strategy. As the simulation clock ticked down to its final minutes, we completed the last micro-evacuation, achieving a 91% civilian survival rate, far higher than any previous attempt. The room fell silent as the directors reviewed the final statistics. Colonel Winters, the program director, finally broke the silence. "In 15 years running this simulation, no team has achieved better than a 72% evacuation rate. Your team just hit 91%. More importantly, you did it by completely reimagining the approach to the problem." He looked directly at me. "Who developed this strategy?" David spoke up. It was Captain Chen's concept, sir. The team refined it, but the core approach was hers. Colonel Winters nodded thoughtfully. Captain Chen, I'd like to speak with you privately after we debrief. Later, in his office, Colonel Winters studied me with interest. That was exceptional thinking today, Captain. Where did that approach come from? It's just how I see problems, sir, I explained. I've always processed information differently than most people. Before joining the military, it was usually considered a deficit. Here, it seems to be useful. He leaned back in his chair. Useful is an understatement. What you demonstrated today was the kind of innovative thinking that saves lives in real-world operations. The military needs officers who can see beyond established protocols when the situation demands it. He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. I'm recommending you for early promotion consideration, Captain Chen. Your performance in this program, particularly today's demonstration, has shown that you have the potential for higher leadership roles. I struggled to process his words. Thank you, sir. That's unexpected. The best officers often surprise us, he said with a slight smile, and themselves. True to his word, Colonel Winters submitted his recommendation, and 6 months later, much sooner than the normal promotion timeline would allow, I was promoted to major. The ceremony was small but significant, with both my parents and David, now a close friend, in attendance. As the new oak leaves were pinned to my shoulders, I thought about how far I had come from the struggling student who could never seem to meet expectations. The military had given me something invaluable, not just a career, but a context in which my natural thought processes were recognized as strengths rather than weaknesses. My new rank came with increased responsibilities. I was assigned to lead a task force developing next-generation logistics protocols for complex humanitarian crises. Exactly the kind of challenge that leveraged my unique way of seeing patterns and connections. Over the next 3 years, my team's work revolutionized how the military approached disaster response, creating adaptable systems that could be customized to the specific geographical, cultural, and infrastructural challenges of different crisis zones. Our protocols were implemented in real-world operations with remarkable success, significantly improving survival rates and resource efficiency in disaster areas. During this period, my interactions with Emily remained infrequent and somewhat strained. She had continued her meteoric rise at Vertex Innovations, becoming the youngest vice president in the company's history. When we did speak, usually during holiday gatherings or rare family events, she remained dismissive of my military career, still seemingly unable to view it as a legitimate professional path equivalent to her corporate success. So you're still in the Army, she remarked during one Thanksgiving dinner, making it sound more like an observation than a question. Yes, still serving, I replied, choosing not to correct her about my branch of service. I'm leading a task force now, developing new approaches to humanitarian crisis response. That's nice, she said vaguely. Vertex just acquired a defense contractor, actually. Maybe there will be some overlap with what you do. Before I could respond, she launched into a detailed account of her latest corporate triumph, negotiating an acquisition that had made headlines in the business press. Our parents listened with rapt attention, asking questions that revealed how closely they followed her career accomplishments. I didn't begrudge them their pride in Emily's success. She had achieved remarkable things and deserved recognition. What stung was the implicit hierarchy in how they valued our different paths. The assumption that corporate achievement somehow ranked higher than military service, on some unspoken scale of success. Later that evening, as I helped with dishes, my mother approached me with a concerned expression. You're so quiet tonight, Jasmine. Is everything okay with your work? Everything's fine, Mom. Actually, things are going really well. The protocols my team developed are being implemented across multiple branches now. She nodded, though her expression suggested she didn't fully grasp the significance. That's wonderful, dear. We're proud of you too, you know. It's just harder for us to understand exactly what you do compared to Emily's work. When she talks about market share and acquisitions, it's more tangible somehow. Her words were well-intentioned but revealing. Even after years of success in my field, my family still viewed my career as somehow less substantial, less prestigious than Emily's corporate climb. Rather than letting this frustrate me, I channeled it into renewed determination. I couldn't make my family understand or value my work, but I could continue to excel at it, to make contributions that mattered, to lead in ways that reflected my unique strengths. 2 months after that Thanksgiving, I received a call that would mark another turning point in my career. Colonel Winters, who had been promoted to Brigadier General since our time in the Advanced Tactical Operations Program, requested me for a special assignment. We're forming a joint task force to completely reimagine our approach to global crisis response, he explained. The changing nature of climate disasters, coupled with increasing geopolitical instability, requires entirely new thinking. Your name was the first that came to mind, Major Chen. The assignment would involve working with top experts from multiple military branches, FEMA, the State Department, and international humanitarian organizations, to develop comprehensive new frameworks for responding to complex emergencies. It was exactly the kind of challenge I had been preparing for throughout my career. The assignment comes with something else, General Winters added. I've recommended you for promotion to Lieutenant Colonel. The board has approved it, effective next month. I was momentarily speechless. Lieutenant Colonel at my age was rare, a clear signal that I was on an accelerated leadership track. Thank you, sir, I finally managed. I'm honored by your confidence in me. It's not about confidence, Chen. It's about results. Your work has quite literally changed how we approach crisis response, and changed it for the better. The promotion is well-deserved. As I hung up the phone, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: pride in what I had accomplished, gratitude for the opportunities the military had given me, and, if I'm honest, a small petty desire to see the look on Emily's face when she learned that her playing soldier sister had achieved a rank that placed me among the top officers in my age group. I immediately chided myself for that last thought. My accomplishments weren't about proving anything to Emily or anyone else. They were about using my unique abilities to make a difference in areas that mattered to me. Yet, as I prepared for my promotion ceremony, I couldn't help wondering if achieving the rank of Lieutenant Colonel might finally be enough to make my sister see my military career as the significant professional achievement it was. The thought was quickly followed by another, more important realization. It didn't actually matter if she ever did. I knew the value of my work, as did the people whose opinions truly counted in my professional sphere. What I didn't realize then was that circumstances would soon provide an unexpected opportunity for Emily to see my work through new eyes. An opportunity that would come in the form of a charity gala, a surprised CEO, and a moment of recognition that would change our relationship forever. My promotion to Lieutenant Colonel came during a small but dignified ceremony at the Pentagon. General Winters personally pinned the silver oak leaves to my shoulders, his normally stern expression softened with genuine pride. My parents sat in the front row, my father recording the moment on his phone while my mother dabbed at tears. They still didn't fully understand the significance of my military achievements, but they recognized that this promotion was exceptional. You're the youngest female lieutenant colonel in your division's history, General Winters noted during his remarks. But that's not why you're being promoted. You're here because your innovative approaches to crisis response have saved lives and set new standards for how we approach complex emergencies. As I stood at attention, the weight of the new rank insignia on my shoulders felt right, earned through years of dedication, creative problem-solving, and a willingness to see beyond conventional approaches. The path from that uncertain teenager who walked into a recruitment office to this moment had been neither straight nor easy, but it had been undeniably mine. After the ceremony, my parents hugged me tightly, their pride evident despite their limited understanding of military hierarchy. "Lieutenant Colonel," my father said, testing the title. "That sounds very important." "It is, Dad," I confirmed. "It's a senior field grade officer rank. Only about 16% of active duty officers reach this level." My mother squeezed my hand. "We always knew you were special, Jasmine. You just needed to find the right place to shine." Their words touched me deeply because they reflected a journey of acceptance, both theirs and my own. They had come to recognize that my different path wasn't a failure to meet expectations, but a success in finding where I truly belonged. As we celebrated with a quiet dinner that evening, I thought about Emily. I had sent her an invitation to the ceremony, not really expecting her to attend given her busy schedule and our complicated history. She had replied with a brief text. Congratulations on the promotion. Sorry I can't make it. Preparing for our big charity gala next week. I had thanked her and left it at that, refusing to let her absence diminish the significance of the day. Yet I couldn't help wondering if she would ever truly see me. Not as her struggling younger sister who had found a fallback career, but as a successful professional who had risen to heights in my chosen field that few achieved. The answer to that question would come sooner than I expected, and in a way I could never have anticipated. 3 days after my promotion ceremony, I received another text from Emily. Vertex is hosting a charity gala for disaster relief next Saturday. We're honoring military and first responders who led recent crisis operations. Would be good optics to have you there in uniform. Can you make it? The invitation was typical Emily, framing my presence in terms of its value to her company's image, rather than any desire to celebrate my achievements. Still, I was intrigued by the opportunity. After years of Emily dismissing my military career, here was a chance to show her my professional world from a different perspective. I can be there, I replied. Send me the details. The gala was being held at the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco, one of the city's most prestigious venues. Emily had arranged for my flight and accommodation, making it clear that Vertex wanted to showcase its support for military service members involved in humanitarian efforts. What she didn't know, what I deliberately chose not to tell her, was that my recent promotion had come with significant recognition for the crisis response protocols I had developed. These protocols had been implemented during several major natural disasters over the past year, including a devastating hurricane that had struck the Gulf Coast just months earlier. The night of the gala arrived, and I dressed carefully in my formal mess dress uniform, the silver oak leaves of my new rank prominently displayed on my shoulders. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized the confident officer who stared back at me. Gone was the uncertain young woman who had always felt inadequate beside her brilliant older sister. In her place stood Lieutenant Colonel Jasmine Chen, accomplished, respected, and secure in her professional identity. The Fairmont's grand ballroom had been transformed for the evening, with elegant lighting, floral arrangements, and large screens displaying images of first responders and military personnel in action during recent disasters. As I entered, I was immediately struck by the opulence of the event. This was Emily's world, where corporate success was celebrated with crystal champagne flutes and designer gowns. A young woman at the reception desk checked my name against her tablet. Lieutenant Colonel Chen, she confirmed, her eyes widening slightly as she took in my uniform and rank. You're seated at the head table with Mr. Davidson and the executive board. I nodded my thanks, somewhat surprised by the prominent placement. Perhaps Emily had more appreciation for my rank than she had let on. As I made my way through the crowded ballroom, I noticed people glancing at my uniform with expressions ranging from curiosity to respect. A few nodded acknowledgement or thanked me for my service, the standard civilian response to seeing a military uniform, though always somewhat awkward to receive. I spotted Emily near the stage, deep in conversation with an older man in an impeccably tailored tuxedo who I assumed must be Richard Davidson, Vertex's CEO. She was stunning in a sleek black gown, her hair elegantly styled, looking every inch the successful corporate executive. She hadn't seen me yet, so I had a moment to observe her in her element, confident, commanding, completely at home in this world of corporate power and wealth. Despite our differences, I felt a surge of pride in my sister's accomplishments. She had worked incredibly hard to reach her position, and she deserved every success she had achieved. Then she turned and saw me approaching. I watched as her expression shifted from professional poise to momentary confusion as she registered my formal uniform and, most significantly, the silver oak leaves on my shoulders indicating my new rank. A brief flash of surprise crossed her face before she quickly composed herself, the polished executive once more. "Jasmine, you made it," she said, air-kissing my cheek in greeting. "I didn't realize you'd be in full dress uniform." "It seemed appropriate for a formal event," I replied evenly. She nodded, her eyes still flickering to my rank insignia with what appeared to be genuine surprise. "Of course. Come meet Mr. Davidson. He's very interested in our military partnerships." She led me to the distinguished man she'd been speaking with. "Mr. Davidson, this is my sister Jasmine. She's with the military." The simplicity of her introduction, "she's with the military," spoke volumes about how Emily still viewed my career as a vague, non-specific occupation, rather than a distinguished professional path. Richard Davidson extended his hand, but as his eyes fell on my rank insignia, something shifted in his expression. He straightened almost imperceptibly, his casual demeanor giving way to a more formal, respectful bearing. "Lieutenant Colonel Chen," he said, his handshake firm and respectful. I wasn't aware that Emily's sister held such a distinguished rank. "What's your area of specialization?" Before I could answer, Emily interjected, her voice slightly higher than normal. "Jasmine just got promoted recently. She works in—" "What is it again, Jas? Supply chain management?" I suppressed a smile at her obvious attempt to translate my military role into corporate terminology she understood. "Emergency response coordination and strategic logistics," I corrected gently. "And yes, the promotion came through last week." Davidson nodded appreciatively. "Impressive achievement at your age, Colonel. We actually have several veterans on our board who speak very highly of the logistics innovations coming out of your division. The hurricane response protocols were particularly groundbreaking." Emily's expression flickered between surprise and confusion, clearly unprepared for her CEO to be familiar with my work. "You know about Jasmine's projects?" "Of course," Davidson replied with slight surprise. "Vertex has been looking at adapting some military logistics models for our global supply chain. The efficiency gains could be substantial." He turned back to me. "We'd love to have your insights on the subject while you're here, Colonel." "I'd be happy to discuss it," I said, maintaining my composure despite the satisfaction I felt seeing Emily's perception of me being rewritten in real time. As more guests arrived, we were directed to our tables for dinner. I found myself seated between Mr. Davidson and another executive, with Emily directly across from us. Throughout the meal, the conversation repeatedly turned to my work, with genuine interest from the business leaders in how military logistics strategies might apply to corporate operations. "The principles are actually quite similar," I explained in response to a question from Davidson. "In both contexts, you're dealing with complex systems, limited resources, and the need to adapt quickly to changing conditions. The difference is in the stakes. In our world, efficiency isn't just about profit margins, it's often about survival rates." Davidson nodded thoughtfully. "That's precisely why we're interested in your models. The pressure of life or death decisions forces innovation that might take years to develop in a corporate environment." Emily remained uncharacteristically quiet throughout this exchange, watching as her colleagues engaged with me as a peer, perhaps even as someone whose expertise they valued and respected. The sister she had dismissed as playing soldier was being treated as an authority by people she sought to impress. After dinner, Davidson rose to give his opening remarks for the evening. He welcomed everyone, explained the charitable purpose of the gala, and then did something unexpected. "Before we proceed with tonight's program, I'd like to acknowledge a distinguished guest joining us this evening," he said, his voice carrying across the hushed ballroom. "We're honored to have Lieutenant Colonel Jasmine Chen with us." To my surprise, he stepped away from the podium and walked to where I was seated. Then, in a gesture that sent a ripple of whispers through the room, he stood at attention and offered a crisp, respectful salute. The moment froze in time, this civilian CEO, a powerful figure in his own right, rendering a military courtesy that recognized the significance of my rank and service. It was a gesture of genuine respect, not just polite acknowledgement. Colonel Chen's innovative work in crisis response has saved countless lives, including during the recent hurricane that devastated our coast, he continued after returning to the podium. Her protocols have become the gold standard, not just for military operations but for civilian emergency management as well. We at Vertex are exploring partnerships to implement similar systems in our global humanitarian efforts. A warm round of applause followed, and I acknowledged it with a nod, deeply moved by the unexpected recognition. Across the table, Emily's face had gone through a remarkable transformation. Shock, disbelief, and finally, something that looked almost like dawning respect. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of conversations, introductions, and unexpected connections. Several of Davidson's executives sought me out to discuss potential collaborations between Vertex's humanitarian initiatives and military logistics systems. A board member who had served in the Navy shared stories of his own service. Throughout it all, Emily hovered nearby, witnessing as her corporate world and my military one intersected in ways she had clearly never anticipated. As the event wound down, Emily found me on the hotel's terrace, where I had stepped out for a moment of quiet. The San Francisco skyline glittered below us, the city lights reflecting on the bay beyond. "So," she said, coming to stand beside me at the railing. "Lieutenant Colonel." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "You never mentioned the promotion was so significant," she said, a hint of accusation in her tone. "Would it have mattered if I had?" I asked quietly. She had the grace to look uncomfortable. I deserved that, I suppose. We stood in silence for a moment, the cool night air carrying the distant sounds of the city. "I've been unfair to you, haven't I?" she finally said, surprising me with her directness. "You've seen my path as less valuable because it wasn't the one you would have chosen," I replied, not accusingly but stating what we both knew to be true. "I think I saw it as less valuable because I didn't understand it," she admitted. "When Mr. Davidson talks about your work, it's with the same respect he uses for our top engineers and researchers. I never realized that I found my purpose, that I'm good at what I do," she nodded, looking genuinely contrite. "I'm sorry, Jas. I've been so caught up in my definition of success that I couldn't see yours, even when it was right in front of me." The apology surprised me. Emily had never been one to admit being wrong. Perhaps this was growth for both of us. "Do you remember what you said to me the last time we really talked about my career?" I asked. "About how I was just playing soldier and would eventually need a real career path?" She winced. "I was wrong, obviously very wrong." "You know what hurt the most about that?" I continued. "Not that you underestimated what I could achieve in the military, but that you thought I was still the directionless teenager who needed your guidance to find her way. You never saw how much I'd grown." "I see it now," she said quietly. "I'm seeing a lot of things more clearly tonight." We stood together in companionable silence, watching the fog roll in across the bay. It felt like a turning point, not just in how Emily saw me, but in how we might relate to each other going forward. "You know what's ironic?" she said eventually. "All those years, I thought you needed to be more focused, more driven, more like me. But you were just focused on different things, driven in your own way." I nodded, appreciating her self-awareness. "We were always different, Em. That's not a bad thing." "No, it's not," she agreed. "But I should have supported your different instead of trying to make it more like mine." She turned to face me fully. "I'm proud of you, Jasmine. Really proud. And I'm sorry it took seeing other people recognize your value for me to fully see it too." Her words, the validation I had unconsciously sought for so long, washed over me. And yet, I realized something important. I no longer needed them the way I once had. Somewhere along my journey, I had stopped measuring my worth through my family's eyes and learned to see it through my own. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot." "So, Lieutenant Colonel," she said, a hint of her old teasing tone returning, but without the dismissiveness that had once accompanied it. "What's next for you? Is general in the cards?" I laughed. "One step at a time. But yes, it's possible." She shook her head, smiling with what looked like genuine amazement. "My little sister, a general. Who would have thought?" "I would have," I said quietly. If anyone had asked me what I wanted, instead of telling me what I couldn't do. The truth of those words hung between us. Not an accusation, but a gentle reminder that sometimes the greatest gift we can give those we love is the space to define success on their own terms. 2 days after the gala, I received a surprising call from Richard Davidson himself. "Colonel Chen," he began, "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not at all, Mr. Davidson," I replied, curious about the purpose of his call. "I'll get right to the point. After our conversations at the gala, I've become even more convinced that Vertex could benefit from your expertise. We're establishing a new division focused on crisis response systems for global humanitarian efforts, and I believe you would be the ideal person to lead it, when you're ready to transition from military service, of course." The offer took me by surprise. "That's very flattering, Mr. Davidson, but my military career is far from over." I understand completely, he assured me. This isn't an immediate offer, but rather an open door for the future. In the meantime, we'd like to establish a formal collaborative relationship between Vertex and your division, if possible. Your sister mentioned you might be open to consulting on some projects. Emily had suggested this? That was unexpected. I'd be happy to discuss potential collaborations, I said cautiously, though any formal arrangement would need to go through proper military channels. Of course, Davidson agreed. Emily will coordinate with you on next steps. And, Colonel, it was an honor to meet you. Your sister is fortunate to have such an accomplished sibling. After we said our goodbyes, I sat for a moment, processing the conversation. Davidson's offer was generous and indicated a level of professional respect I had never expected from Emily's corporate world. But what struck me most was Emily's apparent role in suggesting the collaboration. Had our conversation on the terrace truly changed something in how she viewed my career? My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. Davidson called you? He's been talking about your logistics models nonstop since the gala. Never seen him so impressed. Dinner tomorrow night before you fly back? My treat. I smiled at the message, typing a quick affirmative response. Perhaps this was the beginning of a new chapter in our relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than comparison and competition. The following evening, over dinner at a quiet restaurant overlooking the bay, Emily and I talked more openly than we had in years. She shared the challenges she faced as a woman in the male-dominated tech industry, stories she had never told me before about moments of self-doubt and difficult decisions. I told her about my early struggles in the military, the process of discovering my unique strengths, and the mentors who had helped me find my path. You know, she said as we shared a dessert, I think I've always been a little jealous of you. I nearly choked on my bite of chocolate cake. Jealous? Of me? That's absurd, Em. You've been successful at everything you've ever attempted. She shook her head. Not jealous of your achievements exactly. Jealous of your authenticity, I guess. You found a path that truly fits who you are. I sometimes wonder if I chose mine because it was expected. Because it was the path that successful people were supposed to take. The pride in her voice when she reported this was something new. Genuine admiration without the undercurrent of condescension that had characterized her previous acknowledgments of my career. As we parted that night, Emily hugged me tightly. Not the perfunctory embrace we had exchanged at family gatherings for years, but a genuine connection. I'm sorry it took me so long to see you, Jas, she whispered. Really see you. Better late than never, I replied, returning the hug. 2 weeks later, back at my post, I received a package from Emily. Inside was a framed photograph from the gala, the moment when Davidson had saluted me, captured perfectly by the event photographer. Along with it was a note in Emily's handwriting. To remind you, and me, that true success isn't measured by titles or salaries, but by impact. Yours has been greater than I ever understood. Proud to be your sister. M. I placed the photograph on my desk, where it served as a daily reminder of an important truth. Sometimes the people who know us longest can be the slowest to see who we've become. Not because they don't care, but because they're still seeing who we were when their perceptions of us were formed. In the months that followed, my relationship with Emily evolved into something we had never had before. A friendship between equals, each respecting the other's unique path and contributions. She began to take a genuine interest in my work, asking thoughtful questions about my current projects and sharing relevant articles about military logistics innovations. I, in turn, developed a better appreciation for the challenges and complexities of her corporate world. My parents, seeing this new dynamic between their daughters, seemed relieved and delighted. At family gatherings, the conversation no longer centered exclusively on Emily's achievements, with my military career treated as an afterthought. Instead, both our professional journeys were given equal weight and interest. 1 year after the gala, I was deployed to lead the military response to a devastating tsunami in Southeast Asia. The crisis response protocols I had developed were implemented on a larger scale than ever before, coordinating multiple international aid organizations, local governments, and military units from several countries. When I returned, I found an email from Emily with a link to a Wall Street Journal article about the relief effort. The article specifically mentioned the innovative logistics systems that had dramatically improved aid distribution efficiency, citing, quote, protocols developed by Lieutenant Colonel Jasmine Chen as a key factor in the operation's success. Emily's message was simple. Saw this and thought of you, making a difference in the ways that matter most. So proud to tell people you're my sister. The journey from being the family disappointment to having my sister proudly claim our relationship had been long and sometimes painful. But the lesson it taught me was invaluable. True success isn't about meeting others' expectations or following prescribed paths. It's about finding the place where your unique gifts can make their greatest contribution, even if that place is one no one, including yourself, ever expected you to find. If you've ever felt like the one who doesn't quite fit, who can't seem to excel in the ways others expect, know this. There is a place where your differences aren't weaknesses but strengths, where the very traits that made you struggle in one context make you exceptional in another. Finding that place may take time, may require false starts and unexpected turns, but when you find it, when you discover where your unique mind and heart are truly needed, you'll understand that you weren't broken. You were just looking for your proper home. And when that day comes, when the boss stands up and salutes the colonel, when the doubters finally see what you've known all along, the victory isn't in proving them wrong. It's in realizing you no longer need their validation to know your worth. Your path is your own. Walk it with courage, confidence, and the knowledge that somewhere, there is a place where you don't just belong, you excel. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.